Dan show?
Alphabetical. Got to go alphabetical.
Okay, it's all right. I think hopefully we'll be all right with that. So I'm just really pleased for everyone that's been able to join us. We're going to try, I think, and do a chat every week at around 7 o'clock on Tuesdays. And the idea is that we're going to do something live. We're going to put it on YouTube. It's streamed obviously across LinkedIn and Twitter as well. We're going to put this on audio format, which is going to be great. And then we're going to clip out a few particular sections as well of Omar probably speaking more sense than me. And we thought we'd actually start off with a pretty interesting topic, bearing in mind the immediacy of what's going on in the wider football takeover market at the moment. But before I sort of lead Omar into the first question, just in case people aren't sort of aware of what either of us do, I thought it might be worthwhile. Omar, do you want to just briefly tell everyone, I guess, what you do and your title? Because I think you've probably got the best title, job title in the football industry, to be fair.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so I'm Chief Intelligence Officer at 21st Club, and we're a sports intelligence agency working with rights holders, clubs, brands, media agencies, helping them with their mid to long term strategy, and all underpinned by the use of analytics to do that. And obviously, this topic is very interesting for us because we work alongside a lot of investors who are looking at football clubs and help them A, work out whether they want to invest in football, B, where they want to invest, and C, and then evaluate the risks when they do invest. So yeah, this is a topic very close to our hearts, and it's a real busy area at the moment. So yeah, looking forward to getting our teeth stuck into it.
And very briefly, in case anyone isn't aware of the type of stuff I do, so I'm sports and football lawyer at Sheridan's, and I usually work player and agency side, although we have worked, actually, Omar and myself have worked on a couple of takeovers over the last few years as well, which has been great to work with 21st Club on. So before we get going on a particular bit of questions, or rather questions to Omar, if I just mention also, please feel free just to put your questions in the chat. We'll try and answer as many as we can. We'll have maybe a conversation for 10 to 15 minutes tops, and when you're sick of hearing our voices, we'll try and answer some of your questions as well at the same time. So I think, Omar, in terms of first sort of principles and first overarching ideas from a macro perspective, US takeovers, there's always been US owners, or over the last 15, 20 years, US owners in UK and European football. Why do you think that this issue, or rather this topic, has become such a live point at the moment?
Yeah, it's definitely a trend. Almost every day you're seeing some news report about American investment, interested not just in English football clubs, which, as he said, has been the case probably for a little bit of time now, but actually all over Europe. And I'm indebted actually to our America's MD AJ Swoboda, who does a lot of work with American investors. He's based out in San Francisco. He's done a lot of kind of thinking and research into this. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is, obviously, historically, European sports models have been very different to American sports models. So the American sports model is literally a business model. It's all about growing the value of the franchise, whereas the European model is about rising up the league table, winning trophies, pure meritocracy, promotion, relegation, and so on. And so this model over here, that the American one, was lend itself very much to sustainable revenue streams, not a volatile approach to running a business. And the meritocratic European model, with all its ups and downs, was very much not that. But what we have seen, I think, in the last 10 years or so, is more sustainability coming into football. Part of that is better financial regulations, which plays a big part of it. If you look at UEFA's reports, the profitability of European clubs has really shot up over the last 10 years. And so an owner comes in now and sees that it's not just this loss-making venture. And these US owners, as you well know, Daniel, they're smart. They come in, it's smart money, and they're not just going to come in and throw money at a problem. They're going to think about it in a much more sophisticated way. So yeah, there's a lot more of a kind of I guess, switched on approach, and they're beginning to see these parallels with what they have stateside.
And I think what I would say there is that what I've seen over the years, maybe the last decade or so of working more intimately in the football space and football takeover space as well, is the type of questions that used to be asked of me were, why isn't there any particular cost control regulation? And on one side, and then on the flip side, which is, where do you think broadcasting revenues can go? Because that's obviously the regular reoccurring income, and where is the appetite for people to pay subscription revenues? And now what seems to have evolved the conversation, obviously, which is, how do we think about valuation? We can talk about that in a bit, where you have quite now stringent cost control provisions, if it's FFP, if it's the sustainability and profitability regulations in the Premier League, if it's now the wage caps that are in place in League One and League Two. You've got a much more sophisticated set of cost controls, which weren't there a decade ago or so. So do you think, if we then take it into a little bit of the macro or rather micro perspective, that there's been a trend of greater US ownership or greater US interest in European club takeovers because of COVID and everything that has escalated as a result?
Yeah, I think so. And I think as we get on to valuations a bit later, COVID clearly depresses valuations. Clubs, a lot of them are struggling, particularly as you go down the leagues or go outside the major European leagues. And if you think about football club valuations and the prices that football clubs go for, so Newcastle, reported in the region of about 300 to 500 million in the summer. Newcastle are a massive club. And for an American investor, they're looking at that and saying, okay, we've got a huge brand here. In the US, to get a club or a franchise of that size, you're paying billions. And so that's why it's so attractive. And that's kind of increased with COVID. So I think what people are seeing with COVID as well is not just the opportunity for cheaper clubs, it's also the possible ramifications of it in terms of regulation, which obviously you've spoken about, in that the immediate consequence in the EFL of COVID was salary caps, which again American investors are so familiar with. They're very used to running sports teams that essentially have growing revenues and are able to kind of control their costs over time. And for now, at least League One and League Two, okay, the revenues might not be taking off, but at least you can control the one thing that you want to be able to control. So yeah, certainly that's a big driver. But yeah, I'm kind of interested in some of the conversations you've had. I know you're close to a number of US investors. Are they, particularly the ones maybe that are in football at the moment, are they seeing things differently with COVID? Are they seeing the opportunity to expand their networks, or is it just a case of keeping the lights on at the moment?
Well, I think it's a few things is the truth, and it's some things that we've talked about previously on some of our YouTube chats, which is opportunity and cost control, really. Opportunity being, is there an opportunity to do something not quite akin to what City Football Group are doing? Far from it, because that type of scale is just on another level. But is there opportunity, if there is cash available, and pretty liquid cash available, to be able to do things? It might not be in the UK market, it might be in other particular growth markets. For example, Portugal, might it be Scandinavia, might it be Belgium for work permit particularities for non-EU players. It might also be that even places like Gibraltar, I know it's another one, but in the same way, how many clubs are there to potentially get European places is the truth of one brief example. So I also think the interesting element is how things are necessarily being funded, really. I mean, if we look at the brief history of US ownership of at least UK clubs, as we were doing before this talk, if we look at Ellis Short, Randy Lerner, FSG and the Glazers, actually there's quite a disparity between approaches, is the truth. We're coming up to sort of over 10 years of FSG ownership of Liverpool, much longer for the Glazers, but their approach to financing couldn't be more diverse, is the truth. So I think bearing that in mind, I think one of the things that US owners and other owners are considering now is are there undervalued assets? Just in 2010 for very different reasons, Liverpool was an extremely undervalued asset at just over £250 million. Are there opportunities now across Europe to find value that otherwise might not necessarily be the case? I'm not sure what your thoughts on that maybe.
Yeah, I think that definitely is. It's really interesting, mentioning Ellis Short, Randy. I think you can take the Liverpool and Man United examples as a bit different because they're just massive clubs, and they, I think any investor from anywhere in the world is going to be interested in those clubs. I think if you take the Sunderland and Villa examples, investments in the kind of late-ish noughties, early 2010s, that's when Premier League media rights was kind of hockey stick growth. And I think, and for an American investor looking at that, you're looking at the total global landscape of media rights. The Premier League was clearly the one that was shooting up much quicker. And now since then, we've obviously seen media rights plateau, and yet we're seeing this kind of increase in interest, which is interesting because, as you say, that normally investors will be backing out at this stage because, what is there to grow? But I think you're talking about undervalued assets. I think what they're seeing is certain inefficiencies that exist within the English or European football system. I think one of them is on the commercial side of clubs. Typically, these clubs aren't run in the same way that US sports teams are in terms of their ability to monetize pretty much anything and everything that they do about their club. And I think the other one as well is inefficiency on some of the kind of sporting operations side. So take recruitment. If you look at US sports franchises, they're very analytics driven. They're very sophisticated, or a lot of them are very sophisticated in the way that they run their operations. They're still European football is still kind of reaching that level of maturity, and we've seen. I mean, you mentioned FSG have kind of achieved a competitive edge through finding a better way of recruiting players is just one example, and obviously Liverpool have done very well off the back of that. So yeah, there is clearly a kind of a shift and an emphasis now on not just kind of riding the wave of media rights growth, but actually seeking where these undervalued opportunities exist.
And I think my view then on what we can sort of pivot into there is, if we're talking about inefficiencies, undervalue, whatever the label, the nuanced label is, in our experience, and I know it'll be your experience as well, the main sticking point on almost everything is cost, value, and enterprise value to a degree. And the thing that always I found crazy about football club valuations to a degree is, you can have a player like Wan-Bissaka move to United from Crystal Palace for a huge amount of money. It was at around £50 million, I believe. Now, in the same way, for example, Lukaku's at Everton and moves to United, I think, wasn't it, for however many, or a huge amount of money, 75 million, if I remember correctly. 3 or 4 of those huge transfers could effectively make up the value of most Premier League, lower Premier League teams. In your experience of valuing on-field and off-field, in a way, the squad, but also the enterprise value, what's the typical approach, or what are the type of things that potential ownership groups would be considering?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's important to divorce the squad value from the valuation of the club, because I think that's a natural inclination, isn't it, to think about those the players and go, oh, he's worth X, and by sum all the value of my players, I've got £300 million in assets. But if you sold all those players for £300 million, you don't have a £300 million football club anymore. So it's not, you're not. It's not really a tangible value you can realise in the club. Whereas the valuation of the club itself is something entirely different. So yeah, the valuation of players you can do on the one hand, the valuation of the club that it's done, and you'll know this having been kind of close to these negotiations. It's still a very, well, what's the benchmark in the marketplace? What's this other club sold for? What can we sell it for? There's no kind of, even us working in analytics, we have an approach to valuing football clubs that looks at things like the context around the club. Is it in a big city? Is it has it got kind of a big catchment area? Is it generating revenue? What sustainable revenue has it got? All those kind of things. But it's certainly not an exact science. And As I know, often that's a sticking point. It's the valuation, and I think you find that a lot at the moment with COVID, is that the sellers are still kind of anchored on the prices that they had pre-COVID, on the basis that, look, fans are going to return to stadiums at some point, everything will be hunky-dory again, and European football will be back on its feet. Whereas obviously the buyers are saying, well, I've got to get a discount if I'm buying it in the next couple of years at least. So yeah, I think because there is no science to it, it can actually be quite hard to get a deal done for what are obviously massive clubs.
And I think the bit there as well is, things can change. Obviously, a takeover is quite the dynamic process, as you know as well, which is, something in the due diligence throws up something that might be a bigger liability than they believed, or they're owed, a club is owed less money because they've securitized future monies or whatever else it might be. And obviously, the major difference between the US closed model and the European pyramid structure is, that relegation, the relegation and promotion variable, really, and that goes so much into the pie as to the inherent risk of buying and taking over a club, depending on where that club is in the pyramid, and the fluid nature of how good or bad a season might be could have a huge impact on things more generally. So
crudely, the revenue multiples for a bottom half Premier League club would be between 1.2 and 1.7. So, and that's a reflection of the fact that that revenue that they have is not secure in 12 months time. You could be earning just from 100 million in TV money to 3 million plus parachute payments, solidarity, and so on. Whereas for a top end Premier League club, you're looking much more in the region of kind of 3, 4, potentially even 10. I mean, we saw Man City's valuation with the Silver Lake investment was huge. So that just shows, as you say, the discount for relegation, which you would never want to take away from European football, because that's what makes it so compelling and so great. But that's the thing I think that scares many investors.
No, it's true. Well, we're almost talking for the best part of 20 minutes now. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not sure if you can see the questions that have come in. Can you see them all right?
Yeah, I can see them. Yeah.
Perfect. Is there any ones particularly you want to take? I'm just going to start at the top. Gordon was asking a question about the Newcastle takeover and why do Arabic investors wouldn't finally buy the club. I think the short answer, at least based on what my understanding of the Newcastle takeover was, the Premier League and the actual body within the Premier League that was effectively analysing the owners and directors test, the objective test, weren't necessarily convinced by the information that the prospective buyer had provided to them at that particular time. And as a result, my understanding, at least from all the public reporting, was that the Premier League actually suggested that the buyer go to independent arbitration to ensure an independent arbitrator it could be demonstrated to them that they were actually going to pass the objective criteria, and that at the time was, I believe, rejected by the buyer. So, it's difficult to know what's accurate reporting or not, because we're only basing it on public information. But that seemed to be where they got to, at least on the owners and directors test, which is obviously been a stumbling point from that point.
Yeah. I can see a question here on, are we going to see a more Americanized approach in relation to commercialization of clubs? I think in a word, yes. I think there is a fine line to be tread, though, and I think one of the things with European clubs is that there's a lot of culture and history to respect, and also I think one of the things we don't want to be seeing in European football as kind of football fans is this kind of slapping of logos everywhere and this kind of crude approach to commercializing the club. I think these clubs are institutions of their communities. They've got purposes. They've got a reason for being other than making money. And I think that's where the smart owners and investors will come in and not just kind of slap a logo everywhere. They'll actually kind of think about how can I make this club genuinely more valuable in not just kind of winning more football matches, but more valuable to community, more valuable globally to its fans. And I think that's the approach clubs or investors have got to take, rather than a kind of very crude commercial approach.
I was going to take one from JH27, which was when City had the takeover, the perception was bad, but the owners and people at the club know what they're doing, especially football-wise, which I don't see American investors having much knowledge of. See, I'm not necessarily so sure about the sort of generalization of American investors not knowing much of. I mean, if we take a couple of very good examples, being Liverpool being one, for example, you know, Mr. Henry and et al. Might not have known too much about the intricacies of football come 2008 or 9 before they took over the club, but pretty quickly surrounding themselves with the right people, putting a pretty robust action plan in place, recruiting well on and off, and then putting that infrastructure, that sort of human infrastructure in place at the top, on and off the pitch. It doesn't necessarily mean everyone needs to know every little thing about nuance about the industry, but you need to make sure you find people with the right skill set to be able to complement those skills. So I think in terms of, you know, just stating, you know, UK guys understand how things work and American or Asian guys don't, because they haven't lived and breathed it for their own lives, is a bit of an oversimplification of things, because I've met tons of very, very highly intelligent non-English individuals that get the industry inside out and actually are sometimes more perceptive than a lot of people think.
Yeah, I think owners who aren't familiar with the sport often ask what are deemed to be silly questions, but the silly questions are sometimes the ones that elicit the most interesting answers. You know, an owner might come in, you know, if I think about some of the kind of research we've done before, an owner might come in and, let's say, recruitment teams historically always recruited English players or players from the Premier League. An owner might come in and go, why do we recruit from the Premier League? And then they might ask more questions off the back of that, and eventually you dig into it and you realise actually maybe Premier League experience is overvalued, for example, which is something that we found. So yes, surrounding yourself with the right people, 100% important, but actually continuing to ask those annoying, dumb questions. I think the best owners do that, and are kind of very open about their ignorance and use it as a means to pick holes in the way that things have always been done.
Any particular questions that you want to look to, Omar, there? Otherwise, I can maybe do one more.
There you go for another one. Yeah.
There's a good one by Gordon there, just briefly on multi-club ownership and Watford. Maybe we can actually do another session on that, because I think that's actually a really great topic to dig into in more detail. The question is, how difficult is it for an owner to manage different clubs in different territories? The answer is very difficult unless you have a pretty strong infrastructure and vision in place. And then from a regulatory perspective, it can sometimes be difficult, as per the ENIC case and as per the RB cases as well, that UEFA had to look at, which was whether clubs with common ownership or perceived common ownership could play each other in the same competition, and whether that would lead to integrity of competition issues. So yeah, the short answer is it can be difficult without pretty good infrastructure in place, but the benefits and economies of scale that can be brought to bear when you have one central fulcrum, one particular purpose, and then a number of hugely talented and skilled operators that can work across clubs, can bring a lot of skills to the table.
Yeah, I think we could easily have an hour session, well, probably multiple hour session on multi-club ownership. But I think, yeah, it's great in principle. I think in practice, a lot of clubs have found it really hard. And running one club is hard enough. I think running multiple and having them all speak to each other is a lot harder than that, especially with the short-term nature of football and the decisions that need to be made on a daily basis that maybe don't exist in any other kind of industry. So yeah, I look forward to that chat at least.
I might put you on the spot, Omar, as well, if that's okay, with one question that's come in from a pal of mine, Jack Green. He's asked, and it's actually a really difficult one is the answer. He asked, how would you propose protecting smaller clubs from Wigan-type situations where the owners pull the plug without warning, but without putting off future buyers by having to put large amounts of money in an escrow?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I wouldn't be an expert on financial regulations, but yeah, you've got to be able to attract the right kind of owners to English football to European football, and go through the kind of proper checks and balances on that. That's ultimately what it is. I think having, one of the kind of attractive elements, I guess, of the German model is that you've got fan ownership that can take a view on these kind of things, and fans will always have the best interests of the club at heart. But yeah, it's what's happened at Wigan's horrendous, really, and you wouldn't wish it on anyone. And the only kind of obvious solution that strikes me is having a process that protects clubs from those kind of investors.
I would just say briefly on there as well, and sorry for putting you on the spot, was I think the owners and directors test has to be bulked up to a degree. Is that I think a lot of the issues seem to be the owners and directors test as the gateway into football, i.e. if you pass these objective criteria, you're in, and then there aren't too many other targets that you have to adhere to actively throughout the process. I think a lot of the time, a lot of the stuff seems to be the active management of the club season after season. Now, there's questions about wage caps, and we can make a discussion about that another day as well, which would be quite cool. But yeah, this is the ongoing sustainability of the club. Are they mortgaging assets? Are they doing particular things? Are they securitizing stuff? Are odd things necessarily happen means that there needs to almost be ongoing governance audits, I think, to ensure that type of Wigan-esque approach can't necessarily happen. But in the end, I think it's almost impossible to guard against every eventuality. But what regulation usually does is shore up particular instances that have happened before to ensure that they can't happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I saw one question as well on I can't remember who sent it in on American investment in Serie A, having noticed the increase there. Obviously, Roma, Fiorentina, I think a couple of other clubs as well, Parma, and asking is that the trend that's going to happen? I think Serie A is fascinating to me at the moment. There's obviously conversations around investment in the league and the media rights in the league. It is a sleeping giant. Our model's rated as the fourth best league in world football. But if you go back 20 years, 25 years, it was comfortably the best. It was the place to go. So it's very much a sleeping giant. I think the fact that it is attracting this investment is recognizing the fact that the league is beginning to professionalize, and that at its natural level, Italian football should arguably be ahead of, or certainly be ahead of Germany. I think probably ahead of Spain as well, and competing with the Premier League. And so that's why I think a lot of people are seeing the opportunity to get in at the ground floor here. As
well as we've sort of been reported, whether there's actually external venture capitalist or other monies that is actually looking to buy a stake in what would be the commercial arm of Serie A by the looks of it as well, in order for some type of capital injection, which is quite an interesting model as well.
Yeah, and it could be a route that other leagues go down, which again might be another conversation, another show.
And I might just mention a good point that Faz has made, actually. Faz has said she thinks that sustainability in this climate is key to changing the model, and that might be the way forward. And I think that's actually, right. It is actually right. It's just how you go from the theory of sustainability to what the regulations would look like in practice. And actually, the UEFA regulations, the Premier League regulations, the Football League regulations have all changed as a result of COVID, as a reaction to COVID to a degree, to cater for certain situations. And it looks likely at some point that the Championship might impose some type of salary cap, by the sounds of it too, by what's being reported. And maybe we talk about Project Big Picture another day as well. But the amount of regulatory possible proposals on the table there is monumental, from my reading of it. So, loads of questions there generally. Any other questions, Omar, that you like the look of?
Well, I was just going to say on that sustainability piece, if you don't mind a little plug. So myself and my colleague Ben Marlow have written a piece in Sport Business today that looks at that sustainability piece in the EFL, and specifically, some of the challenges that English football has with wealth concentrated at the top, and the incentives that drives, I guess, lower down the pyramid, and how you can create a more sustainable environment for EFL clubs. And we've got a few ideas that I'll let folks read the piece, but certainly I think if you don't have sustainable football clubs at that level, then you're not going to attract investment. The clubs aren't going to be able to kind of rise up the pyramid, and you're going to end up having this kind of growing gap between the haves and have-not.
And on that point, we're at half past. We've had some great questions and some really good discussion on that. So Omar, firstly, appreciate all your time to come on. We're hopefully going to make this a weekly occurrence. If anyone wants to tweet or message us for particular topics that they actually want discussed for our sessions, then that'd be great. Omar, do you want to tell everyone where they can follow you online for all of your insights?
Yeah, it's at Omar Chowdhury on Twitter. That's where I mostly am. And at 21st Club for insights from our football team.
Fantastic. And then I'm at Football Law across a variety of different channels, including TikTok, although I don't dance or sing, you'll be pleased to know, Omar. On that note, thanks everyone for joining. We're going to put this out as a podcast as well, and then hopefully everyone can join us this time next week, half an hour until Champions League matches. Omar, anything to look out for tonight? I can put a disclaimer that we're both Liverpool fans. So
yeah, I think we can expect goals in the Atalanta Liverpool game. We were chatting pre-show. I think that could be a little bit Roma Liverpool 2018. That.
So basically, expect a 0-0. Great to chat, and we'll see everybody this time next week. Thanks.